Okay, welcome everyone back from lunch. Sorry, we're still running a little bit late. I'm actually going to return the favour from Anne yesterday for introducing me. And as Anne said, I've known her for a considerable amount of years. We've worked together on a lot of projects. She was at Leeds Beckett for quite a long time as their Director of Clinical Skills and Simulation. But like me, she took the leap of faith and actually moved into a consultancy role a year or so ago, is it now? So brave person, but she's there, she's out there, and she's actually working with a variety of organisations, CCGs, universities, NHS trusts. So I think she's beginning to feel a little bit more comfortable about taking that leap of faith. And she's also come on board with ASPiH on the Accreditation Committee. So, Anne.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Jane, for that introduction. Okay, so you've introduced me already, so I won't go through who I am and what my background is. So this afternoon, really, I've been asked to talk to you a little bit about accreditation with ASPiH. And the reason I think I've been asked is because I've got two views of the ASPiH accreditation. I was the first person to actually go through the accreditation process and come out successfully at the other end, and also then to be invited onto the accreditation committee. So I've gone through the process as an assessor as well as a candidate. So I'm hoping that this afternoon I can share a few pointers with you. So an overview of what I'm hoping to talk through is rationale for the standards and accreditation. So just to remind you about the standards, to let you know where the standards came from and the reason that they were developed, and take that forward into accreditation and what that accreditation process looks like. So we're going to clarify that over the next few minutes. And then I will outline my personal journey, and it's not an ego trip, I promise that. It's more about what have I learned from doing that and what can help you moving forward to actually take that accreditation on in the future. So we'll look at pros and cons, we'll look at some of the barriers, potential barriers that might come in your way, and how you might want to actually overcome those or try and navigate around them. So there will be highlights from both perspectives, if you like. So that as an applicant and that as an assessor. So I hope that will be okay for this afternoon, and we will have time for questions at the end, if that's okay. So just a little reminder, I've pulled together a timeline as to where the actual accreditations came from. So 2012 saw the beginning of the journey of developing the standards. And that was basically when Health Education England, the Higher Education Academy, got together with ASPiH and developed the simulation development project. So accreditation officers were put in place across the regions, went out and actually scoped simulation across all providers and looked at what was out there. So what was the mannequin usage like? What was training like? How was simulation developed? So that was 2012. Moved on a little bit then to 2014 when the first summary of that outcome was actually pulled together. And one of the key pointers from that exercise was there was proof that there was a need for standards, basically. We wanted to pull everybody together and make sure that there was some integrated simulation development across all the regions. If we move on a little bit further to 2015, that's when the standards project team were pulled together. So a team of experts in simulation got together and looked at a draft standard, and that was really out to consultation to all sorts of organisations. So across all the healthcare professionals, across professional groups, the NMC, General Medical Council, etc. And standards were actually pulled from that, and the report was published. 2015 and 16, there was quite an extensive consultation around those standards, and I think I'm right, Jane, was there 2 or 3 rounds of consultations? So everybody had the chance to actually feed into those standards, whether that was online or face-to-face meetings, focus groups, etc. And then the final draft was pulled together. And that went live and was launched at the ASPiH conference in 2016. So they have been out there for a while, and obviously they'll be coming up for review shortly, and things change over time, so we presume there will be changes to that at the next review. Can I just ask for a quick show of hands as who's actually read the ASPiH standards? Great stuff. We're winning. Okay. So from the standards, then accreditation was developed. And accreditation went live in 2018. So January this year, the process of accreditation went live. And we'll go through the different formats of that accreditation a little later on. So just as a reminder of the standards, there are 21 in total, and they're split into 4 groups, if you like, or four subject matter areas. So the first is looking at faculty. The second is looking at the technicians and technical support. Third is looking at activity, which is split then into actual programmes, into assessment and into in situ simulation. And also then we've got resources, so facilities, technology, leadership development and the actual infrastructure to what aids good simulation. So those are the standards. That's a brief really, so that's a brief outline. If you do look in the full document, which is a picture on your right, that will go into more detail about how the standards should be met and what you need to be achieving. So if you haven't already gone away and read that document, I would strongly suggest that you do that. So how does that actually translate into accreditation? I think basically there's 3 modes of accreditation, if you like. There's the individual accreditation, so you as a simulation provider can put forward to apply for that. And if you look at the standards here, those are focusing on the ones around faculty alone. So there's 3 standards in that group to actually unpick, which we'll come on to on a later slide. You've then got the option to look at programme accreditation. So that might be somebody who works in a small organisation that might just have 1 or 2 programmes running, and they could maybe take that forward and look at accreditation. And that's looking more about the activity, so what's being undertaken, what's actually happening there. And then you've got organisational accreditation, and that's looking at your technical staff and your resources. So what have you got there? What's the infrastructure? What's the support? What's the mechanism? What's the leadership like? And I think sometimes that's a difficult one to get in place, even if you've been working in an organisation for some time. But looking at the standards and working towards that will help you drive your organisation forward. So a definition of accreditation. Can anybody offer a definition of accreditation? What do you actually see it as being? Quality? Yeah, you're quite right. Anybody want to add anything to that? If you look at the accreditation that I've pulled up here, it's a seal of approval from an independent accrediting body. So it's certifying that an individual or an organisation has met certain standards. Now, to me, there's something missing from that actual definition. Does anybody else think there's an element lacking there, or something, a word missing perhaps? Maintain is a good one. It's not the one that I put in there, but you're right, yeah. Practice, yeah, definitely. Anything else? I think really it's accreditation now in this moment, so it's not something that you're going to be accredited over a lifelong period necessarily. It's how you perform or your organisation performs now. So to me there should be a date line, if you like, attached to that. And that's exactly what ASPiH have done. So the accreditation process, no matter which route you decide to go down, runs over a 3-year cycle, because we know technology changes, we know staff change, programmes change. So looking at a 3-year accreditation programme will offer you that opportunity to review what you're doing. So I've put this slide up now just to unpick the process a little bit further and look at what you need to achieve and what you need to do, and also how much it costs. That's one of the questions that we always get asked. So if you're looking about an individual accreditation, The cost, if you're an ASPiH member, is included, so it's not going to cost you anything extra. And that's assessed remotely. So what you'd be asked to actually do is fill in an application form, pull relevant evidence together to prove that you've met those standards, send it into ASPiH in a zip file or some other format, which again we'll come on to later, and then it'll go on to 2 assessors to be reviewed. Programme accreditation, there is a charge at the moment of £300 for the programme accreditation. That again is the same format for accreditation, it's done remotely, but there will be some site visits as a quality assurance mechanism within there. I think that's roughly about 10% at the moment. Organisation accreditation, there will be a cost of the site visit there, but the actual cost of the accreditation process itself is included in ASPiH membership. So if you're local to the UK, that's not going to be too bad. If it's somebody who's in Hong Kong or America, then obviously the cost of accreditation would go up a little bit. And that's really to facilitate the assessors to go out and have a look at that organisation, ask face-to-face questions, be able to discuss how simulations delivered with learners from that organisation, and have a look at the facilities and how they're used. And the initial assessment for that is again remote initially, just to have a look at the documentation, make sure everything's in place prior to an assessment visit. And then that will be on a 3-year cycle. So again, in 3 years' time, it'll be the same process, but hopefully, no matter which route you've gone down, you'll have learnt from that process, learnt how to gather your information, continue to gather that information over the 3-year period. So hopefully that process isn't going to be quite as onerous next time. So re-accreditation and standards, I'm sure we've all come across the Plan, Do, Study, Act model before. So it's looking at that, building on what you've learnt from your last cycle of accreditation and looking at where you want to go in the future and how you can build those processes in. Again, people sometimes say, well, why do we need standards? What are they there for? But I think, as it says on here, Lord Kelvin said, if you can't measure it, you can't improve upon it. How can you actually prove that you've taken things forward and expanded on what you're doing? So benefits. What do you think the benefits of accreditation might be? So from your point of view, whether that's individual or whether that's from an organisation or a programme point of view, what do you see the benefits to be? Sorry?
It's outward facing, people can see.
Yeah, yeah. It is a positive tick in the box, yeah. Any other positives or reasons for going through accreditation processes? Yeah, yeah. I think if we look at some of the benefits that we've come up with, the first one's looking at people, and that can be your organisation, your faculty, your simulation team, etc. And basically that's looking at development needs. So if you're mapping against the standards and you're going for accreditation, it's easy to work out where the development needs are going to be and what you need to do to try and achieve that. Okay, so also a process for improvement, which goes without saying, and hopefully it'll help build a stronger workforce, because if you're going through an organisational accreditation process, there's that need for collaboration, there's that need for working together, and hopefully that sort of performance will stay. Talking about performance next, actually, I think there's a need for a reward for doing a good job, and I don't think we're always rewarded for that work. And I think accreditation is seen as a way to take that forward. So not a badge of honour as such, but proof that you can do what it says on the tin as far as your job description goes. So you're meeting certain standards and you're performing to a certain level. And I think often there is this challenge of not one-upmanship, but striving for improvement, and trying to be one better than your next door neighbours, or trying to build that confidence. Like you mentioned earlier, it can help build your profile, so it can be used as a marketing tool as well. So if you've got individual accreditation and you're changing jobs, for example, it might help you get a new job. If you're thinking about programme accreditation, is that going to attract students? The same for the organisation. I'm thinking maybe about the changes in nursing, for example, now, and how the new curriculum's coming in. If your programme or your organisation is ASPiH accredited, is that going to help attract more students? Partnership working, again, I think if you're working towards your standards, there is that element of partnership working that's needed. So that joined up thinking and that working together is always a benefit. And this is a reason to actually do that and do that well. Planning, again, if you're mapping towards standards, you've got a plan in front of you. It's just unpicking that and looking at where you're going to go next. I think the patient should come first on that list, not at the end. So all of this is about improved patient care. So improving the standards, working towards accreditation, the end result is to try and improve patient safety. So that should come first and not at the end of the list. Other reasons for accreditation are certainly implementing standards within your organisation. When we're looking at research around simulation-based education, if it's not standardised, it's more difficult to collect data, it's more difficult to pull research projects together. And certainly when you look at the literature, there are few studies looking at clinical outcomes, or certainly looking at clinical outcomes over large numbers. So maybe by standardising what we're doing, it will help research and help drive that forward. I think as far as evaluation goes with simulation-based education as well, we know it works, we know students like it, we don't always understand why or how it works. And again, if you've got a standard process and something to aim towards, it will help with that. Data capture. We all collect data through simulation, whether that's on the simulators, whether that's through learning space, whether it's through OSCE marking criteria, for example, on paper. But what do we do with it? So again, if there's a standardised format, it will help pull research together in that way. Unproven, I think we've already sort of touched on that already, so we're on to number 4. Non-standardisation. Certainly within my new role, working across organisations and a range of organisations, I've yet to find 2 centres that deliver simulation in the same method or the same way, or plan it in the same way. I'm not saying standards will overcome that totally, but it will help. And then unexplored or overarching approach to patient safety. I'm not sure, again, standards will answer the question there totally, but it will help to improve that process. So the next slide really is just to look at the accreditation process. So what do you need to do as applicants? I think the first thing is to look on the ASPiH website, pull off the documents, make sure you understand the standards, that you've read them. Think about what route would be best for you and your organisation. Have a look at the application forms, have a look at examples of evidence that you could actually submit, and prepare in that way before you actually take it any further. So choose the appropriate application when you've done that. Look at the evidence that you've already got in your organisation. I think often time is an issue for a lot of people, and there's sometimes a misconception of how much time this might take to pull together. A lot of evidence you will already have. It's just pulling that together into one place. And it could be one piece of work that you've done will meet multiple standards, so there won't be that much work involved. Notify ASPiH about your intention to actually take this process forward, and that's just a matter of filling in a simple form online, and that will just tip off the accreditation team to expect another application, so we can look at reviewers, who's going to be the best people to actually review your application. Then it's completing all that work, putting your files in a zip folder perhaps, or looking at another method of submission, sending that off to ASPiH. And then that will go to reviewers, and we'll come on to a slide a little bit later that unpicks the mechanism for what happens behind the scenes, so that it's a transparent process. Usually that process would take about 2 to 3 months in total before you get a result back and you know whether your application's successful. But we will look at the time frame a little bit more. So once you've submitted, it will only take about a week for you to get a response back from ASPiH. So it's quite quick, you know they've received your application, documents can be opened, and then you will get a quick review of what you've submitted. So if there's any obvious omissions, somebody from ASPiH will be in touch to help you formulate your application process a little bit more. Within the second month then, you'll be assigned, for example, if you were going through the individual process, you would be assigned 2 reviewers. And these are experts in the field of simulation-based education that have gone through training in the accreditation process. So they will review your forms, review the information, review the evidence that you've submitted, and look at whether that actually meets the standards or not. And if there are any gaps that have been noticed, or feel that there's elements that could be strengthened a little bit, you will get individualised feedback from each reviewer to point you in the right direction. And then you'll be given an opportunity to tweak your application form, if you like, resubmit, and then hopefully successfully go through that process. And the results will be back with you within 2 to 3 months. So it's not too onerous. And this is what happens behind the scenes with your application. You often wonder, if you've emailed something off, what happens to it? Has it been received? Where's it gone? Has it gone into the ether? So assessors too will be assigned, as I've mentioned. If that was an organisation, for example, if it was a university or a hospital trust, then it may be 3 or 4 people that would come out and assess. But individuals, it's usually 2. So as I said, they would be experienced in simulation-based education, and they would have undergone specific assessor training. So what do they do once you've got your application? How do we score it? How do we look at the information you've sent? These are basically like a scoring rubric that we've pulled together. So for those of you that are from academia, you'll be familiar with that format for marking assignments. It's the same sort of format that we use within ASPiH. So there's a scoring mechanism for the assessors to work through. The 2 assessors do go through that in fine detail, but then the actual outcome at the end is a decision made by the full committee. So it goes to the accreditation committee. Other people may or may not review your application, and then a final decision is made. But it's normal to get initial comments and feedback before your final submission. So it's not seen as a fail at all. It's not that. It's a way of building that application and making it stronger so that it will be successful. And this is an example, one element that's been pulled from that assessment matrix. So it probably will look familiar to those in academia. So you've got the criteria, so that might be, you know, what are your individual qualifications, for example. And then you've got different levels of how you actually meet that standard. And you would be given a score according to that grading structure. So it's quite straightforward, and it's a reasonably quick process for the assessors to go through. So just to sum up what the overall process is like, again, it's complete the preliminary registration form after you've read the documentation and you're familiar with the process. Submit your application with the relevant evidence, regardless of which route you're going through. Wait for your reviewer responses. Action any responses that have been outlined, and then resubmit, well, not resubmit, but submit that application and wait for an outcome. So all in all, 2 to 3 months. So it's reasonably straightforward, and it is always positive and supportive feedback that you receive. Does that make sense so far as that goes? Okay. So again, this is just to sum up at the end the costs of the process, because again that question's always asked. So just a reminder that it is over a 3-year process, regardless of which route you go down, and it is linked to membership. So you do need to be a member of ASPiH to be able to go through the accreditation process. So the payment structure is clear, concise, and it's on the website if you need to go and review that. So I'm going to switch a little bit now and go through my journey through the accreditation process and what I've learned from it. Okay. So first of all, I heard about the accreditation. I thought that sounds like a really good idea, and then all these questions come into your mind. So what is it? What do I need to do? How am I going to do it? What's it going to cost? All these things are going through in your mind, and it's trying to make some sense of that. So making a decision to apply. and this is just my personal ideas and reasons for going through that. It was to confirm that what I was actually doing met the standards. So was I doing it right? I think sometimes we work potentially in isolation to a degree, and it's confirmation that the work I was undertaking was to the right standard. So that was one reason. That my job title worked, that I could do what it said on the tin. So it's a rubber stamp of approval really to say, well, yes, yeah, you're meeting the standards. This is what we'd expect somebody to be doing in that role, for example. And it's recognition. I think most of us have worked in simulation for a long time, and you don't often get recognised for that work. And sometimes it's a bit of a clique, if you like. It's an area that some people don't quite understand what simulation's about. And I think it's just getting that recognition for doing the work. The cons, and tell me if you agree or don't agree with these, it could be perceived as being another hoop to jump through. So things like, you know, you're in academia, you've got the PGCHE to do, you're being pushed to do a PhD, you're working in simulation, and now it's accreditation. Do we do it? Don't we do it? Do we take that forward? So I think, yes, it is another hoop to jump through, but it's got those benefits that we talked about earlier. It's time consuming. I haven't got time to do it. A lot of the work, as I've said earlier, you will already have there. So if you look at the courses, the simulation sessions that you're doing with your students already, it's just making a note of those, pulling that information together, sitting down and reflecting on, well, what have I done? What have I done over the last 3 years? And making a list. And it's surprising how much information and work that you've already got there. I think as well sometimes ASPiH accreditation, because it's not a must-do, is not seen as a key priority by your organisation. So there might be a little bit of lack of support there in some instances. To me, that's like reverse psychology. If somebody says, we don't see it as a key priority, oh, we're not interested, then I'll go and do it. So it's a bit like reverse psychology. So that was more of a driver to me than it was an obstacle. So those are the reasons that I went for the decision to apply. And it was thinking about which route. So I was in academia at the time, which route's going to be best for my organisation and what's going to be best for me. So there was a little bit of a selfish streak in there as well. But I think sometimes there needs to be. Organisational was the first thing that I looked at. So what about the university as a whole? Can we go for organisational accreditation, encompass all the allied healthcare professional courses, nursing courses, physiotherapy, etc., under one umbrella? So I pulled the application form off the ASPiH website and started working through it, and the organisation simply wasn't ready. I don't think there was the infrastructure there at the time to actually take that forward. So that was put on hold. And I looked at, well, what about the programmes? Could we go for programme accreditation? Are there any programmes within the organisation that we'd like to increase numbers in or have the capacity to build more numbers into that? But being a university, which one do you choose? Or which few do you choose? Where do you start with that? It'd make more sense really to go with organisational accreditation. So that was put on hold. And that's why I went for individual accreditation at the time. I knew I was looking to move into a different realm, into a different job, maybe a totally different role. I didn't know what at the time. So individual would help the organisation while I was still working there, but it was something I could take with me. So when I left the organisation, obviously the accreditation came with me and wasn't something that the university held on to. So again, assessor tips from an assessor's point of view. I would suggest looking long term. So you think about your organisation, but think about yourself as well. And where do you fit within that? Which of these routes is going to fit for now, and what might you work towards in the future? Don't forget your technicians, and think about the work that they can do to help build the application for organisational accreditation. They might not necessarily be able to go down the individual route themselves, but could certainly, as Jane said yesterday, help towards organisational accreditation. I think consider applications from maybe key individuals as well first. If you're thinking about organisational accreditation long term, it might be a little bit of a shortcut, if you like, if you get one or two key people to go through individual accreditation first. You'll be familiar with the process. It's a lot shorter for individuals. It doesn't include a site visit, so it's easier to undertake. And then when you do go on to organisational accreditation, you've already got those staff in place. Half the work will be done. So it's just thinking about how would this join together and which route's best for you. And I think that's important to remember, what's best for you as well. Hurdles or excuses. I think we often try and make hurdles out of things that are not necessarily there. So, as I mentioned earlier, not seen as a priority by the employer. Should it be? I think there's room for discussion there as to should it be seen as a priority. If you're thinking about re-accreditation for nurses, if you're thinking about how the curriculum's going to change in the future, should this actually be a driver to help support individuals and organisations through that process? Time to read through the documentation. We're all busy, we've all got busy lives, but it's making that time to actually sit down and have a look at it. Do I have enough experience? I think this is a valid, real question to ask yourself as well. Do you have enough experience? So if you're actually new to simulation, it might be worthwhile gathering that evidence first and then looking at application in a few months' time, 12 months' time perhaps. So knowing about the accreditation process now and starting to gather the information for future is really useful. Procrastination. I don't know about you guys, but that's my biggest barrier when I'm doing anything new. It's I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it next week. Good with diets like that as well. So, you know, I'll start tomorrow, I'll do it later. So I found a video, a very short video on the internet that I'm going to share with you now, and I just want to know if anybody actually recognises themselves in this video. So if you just bear with me for this, just plays for a minute or so. Is that going to start automatically? Yeah.
This morning I got up and got ready quickly because I had to get a lot of stuff done. I sat down at my desk to start getting my stuff done, and I spilled my coffee, so I got a sponge to clean it up, and I figured I'd take an extra minute to clean the whole desk because a clean desk would help me get my stuff done. When I was finished, I realized I hadn't eaten anything and I didn't want to be hungry while I got my stuff done, so I went into the kitchen and I was out of cereal. When I got to the grocery store, I remembered a bunch of other crap I needed to get, and I figured I was already there, so I did my shopping for the week so I didn't have to worry about it while I got my stuff done. When I got home, I didn't feel like cereal anymore, and so I made an omelet and I did the dishes so I wouldn't have to do them after I got my stuff done, and then I went out to get some oil from the hardware store because my desk chair is kind of squeaky and I didn't want to be distracted by a squeaky chair while I got my stuff done. When I got back, it was getting kind of late, and I knew I wouldn't be able to get my stuff done today, so I started watching the Twilight Zone marathon on TV. I just have to make sure I get to bed early because I want to be well rested tomorrow so I can get my stuff done.
Hands up if you recognise yourself in that video. It's not just me then. That's the biggest hurdle. So I think if we look at how you're going to take accreditation forward, the first thing is getting over that hurdle. So how do you stop yourself being like that person in the video? That's the most difficult one to actually do. So overcome procrastination. Do it now. Don't leave it, and don't make excuses. So thinking about how you would actually pull the application together, it's looking at what formats can you actually do that. I think on the ASPiH website it suggests pulling together your evidence in a zip file, a Word zip file for example. But there are other ways of submitting that, and what have you already got access to? And for example, if you're in higher education, you might have access to PebblePad or something like that. It's an online portfolio. So I had to go off and do something, go off on a tangent and develop my application in PebblePad. So not as ASPiH asked me to do, I went off and did it in a different format. So I'll share a couple of shots of that with you in a second. So think about what would make it easy for you to gather your evidence, and what would make it easier for the assessor to actually go through and read that evidence and be able to make sense of it. So think of it from both sides when you're developing your application. So, have you got a repository? Are you already working towards, developing your own professional portfolios? Is that work already there? It might just be that the format that needs changing. We mentioned already that this is on a 3-year cycle, so it's like professional registration as well, it's on a 3-year cycle. So how are you going to keep that up to date, and where are you going to keep your evidence over the next 3 years while your application's live? So it might be you've got a folder on, Google Drive or something, or it might be that you're considering using something like PebblePad, for example. Assessor tips. We'll come on to what the narrative actually means in a moment, but I think if you're looking at applications, sometimes people will write about their experience, but it doesn't always answer the questions that the application form asks. So you'll get loads of really interesting information, but it's not relevant to that particular standard. So I'll show you that in a little while. Think creatively as well. So what evidence have you got? Have you written a course? Have you written something that's got a massive simulation, simulation-based scenarios within that? That might meet multiple standards. So we don't really want to see 20 different pieces of evidence for each of the 3 standards for an individual accreditation. We'd rather see 2 or 3 really good pieces of evidence that support all 3 standards. So it's just thinking creatively, and it's saving you work as well. Think about the Assessors Journey. So again, if you're in, it's all right laughing, if you think about marking assignments, for example, if you're in higher education, sometimes it's difficult for the examiner, if you like, or the assessor, to work out what piece of evidence relates to which standard. So there needs to be either a route map through it or a guide to the assessor, or just make the criteria really easy to follow when you actually put your submission in. So it's not difficult to do that, but just link it together so it's easy to follow. And consider using multimedia evidence as well. It's often difficult to articulate perhaps what happens in a debrief session. So you might be able to write a brief reflection, but it's much easier to put in a video clip of a debriefing that you ran, and then maybe write a little bit of a narrative after that to say, well, yeah, I think I did this really well, but next time I'm going to try X model of debriefing and the reasons why. So you can use multimedia, you can use photographs, you can use videos, so be creative with it as well. This is just a slide shot from PebblePad. So when I actually pulled my application together, I built a template within PebblePad that mirrored the pages of the ASPiH form. So this is just the introductory page that says what it is, why it's been developed, and I know you won't be able to read the tabs across the top, but they're just mirroring the pages on the ASPiH application form. So I thought it was a quick and easy format. The assessors could then just click on those different links and actually work through the application. And this is an example of one of the pages. Again, if it's a little bit blurry, don't worry too much. But the good thing about PebblePad is you can put hyperlinks in there. So when you're listing your organisational membership, for example, it might be an organisation that ASPiH members may not be familiar with and don't really know what it is, but it can help support your application. If you've got a hyperlink in there, it's really easy to find out what you're talking about. And it also links down the end then what that actually means. So is it a current accreditation? Is it a current membership? Has it expired? What was your role within that? So it's really clear to actually pull everything together. This again is looking at a different page of the actual assessment form. So this is a description of teaching that's been undertaken. So there's a page on the application form for that. So I listed the teaching that had been undertaken, and then just summarised underneath what was my learning from undertaking that teaching, what am I going to do next? And that goes on a second page as to what am I going to do, what are the changes I'm going to implement in practice. So this wasn't necessarily asked for, but it pulled together what I'd taught, why I'd done it, what I'd learnt from it, and what I'm going to take on into future practice. We mentioned earlier about the narratives sometimes going a little bit off pat, so I've put a picture of a skier there because people tend to go off piste when they're writing their actual narrative. So if we're looking at the standard, the first standard there for educators to ensure that there's a safe learning environment and encourage self-reflection, you quite often get an applicant who'd answered one of those elements really well, but not the second, so it doesn't meet the standards. So it's making sure that all those pointers are covered, and then you'll see there's a box to also include a 200-word narrative for each of those standards. So often we'd get a lovely description of what master's programme somebody had been on, but it doesn't answer the question, it doesn't support that standard. So it's just reading the question again and making sure that you answer what is actually asked. The same with Standard 2, that's got continuing professional education, but also performance review by both participants and faculty. So again, you tend to get the review by participants, but not necessarily peer review of the work that you're undertaking. So again, it's making sure all those elements are incorporated. Debriefing is the third standard, and that's where I think multimedia submission of evidence may come to the fore. So maybe showing a video clip. I don't want hours and hours of debriefing, but a video clip to highlight a pertinent point would be useful within that. I think it's also important to think about when do you apply. So when in your journey do you think about application? And again, with me, it was thinking about what evidence have I already got. I'd gone through a master's programme, I was working on a PhD. There's quite a lot of evidence already there. We're just sorting out what was appropriate and what wasn't, and filling in any gaps that needed filling in. I think because, again, of the undergraduate nursing curriculum that I was involved with and I'm involved in now with a different university, that's a driver to get that accreditation process in place, and also, again, then to use it as a potential marketing tool and seeking a new job. So all that sort of came into place at the same time. So assessor tips, we've mentioned map against the standards and identify gaps, but don't forget what work you've already been doing and what's out there. Consider what evidence you've already got. What have you used for other programmes? What have you used for other accreditation? And think about, if you're going for organisational accreditation, is that infrastructure in place? We don't want people to put forward an application when the structure's not there and be disappointed with the outcomes. It's better to know what the standards are, prepare for that, and then put in a really comprehensive application, maybe 6 months, 12 months down the line, and be successful straight away. So apply when you meet the standards or when your organisations meet the standards. And don't forget the timeline. There is a timeline, so once you've applied, it's not an open-ended timeline. It's got to be completed within a certain length of time. So get your stuff done, as that video says. This is proof that I was certified. Some people might say it's about time, but you will get your certificate then at the end of it to prove that you've been successful. So just really to summarise, the accreditation standards do provide a common language, they provide a common set of expectations, and it's something to work towards. So I see it as not a carrot and stick, but something to work towards to an agreed level. Stop procrastinating. I think we've agreed that's the biggest barrier. And as we said at the beginning of the slide, it's to make sure that simulation-based education is done properly to a high standard. Do it right even when nobody's looking. Okay. Thank you very much. Have you got any questions? Stunned silence.
Stunned silence. And that's, oh, hang on. Can we take one question?
One.
Yeah.
Very quick one.
Yes.
When you talk about the organisational visits,
Yes.
and that, I work at university as well, but we're across 3 separate sites.
Yeah.
Across Cambridgeshire and Essex. So would it be a visit to each site, or would it be just one visit to the university?
Do you want?
No.
I'll start, you finish if I forget anything. I think as long as you're carrying out, you've got maybe one sort of overarching set of rules, regulations, standards, policies, one infrastructure. It probably be the site that does the most simulation work, if you like, that would be visited. So it wouldn't be 3 separate visits, am I right?
Yeah, no, I was going to echo that, to be honest. It would have been lovely to have, you know, looked at all your sites, but
Yeah,
it will be
it
one day that will be jam-packed off, so, yeah.
Any other questions?
Well, Anne and I will
No.
be here till the end
The
of
end,
the day,
yeah.
if anybody's got anything. Of course, you can get hold of us as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you.